Russia is pouring not just the last of its reserves into Pokrovsk, but actually pulling forces from elsewhere on the front lines. Just how desperate is Russia to seize Pokrovsk, and why is it taking so much longer if the encirclement was so inevitable? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So, Russia is reportedly surging troops into Pokrovsk as their reserve forces run dry. This is according to partisans collecting intelligence inside of Russian-occupied territory. Reportedly, new soldiers, newly recruited soldiers, are being sent into assault units without even completing their registration, let alone their training. This is, again, intelligence from the Atesh resistance movement inside of Russia. And this is, again, part of reports that military convoys carrying personnel and equipment are moving daily towards Pokrovsk, and with troops are likely drawn from Kherson and Zaporizhia directions to help fill these gaps. Right now, that means, of course, that Russia's operational reserves are already exhausted. Again, you really, in a long, broad frontline war of attrition like this, the one thing that Russia really doesn't want to find itself doing is pulling forces off of other locations in the front line. That can open up opportunities for even limited Ukrainian forces to conduct a counterattack, or, again, allow Ukraine to pull its own forces to reinforce their own defensive efforts in Pokrovsk, right? Because, again, it's like trying to walk through a mirror, right? Wherever the person in the mirror goes, they're always blocking you. And that's a recipe to fail in your assault. That's why generally, when you're on an offensive or on a defensive fight, you commit something called operational reserves. These are troops who are set aside expressly for the purposes of being thrown into a fight to shore up a failing situation or to exploit a collapsing offensive situation. Now, the fact that Russia did that, still can't encircle Pokrovsk, is a sign of just how committed Ukraine is to holding the city. But what's also insane is that, according to some agents inside the 506th Motor Rifle Regiment of the Russian Army, hundreds of new soldiers arrive at their location daily and are immediately sent into assault operations without even registering that they've arrived in their units, right? So this means that, again, the level of just franticness into these assault operations is truly insane. This is a reflection of just how bad the Kremlin wants to capture Pokrovsk. Again, it's just such a case study in the Russian sort of propaganda as victory mentality. Pokrovsk itself, they're like, oh, it's a logistics hub. But look at the map, guys. It's a logistics hub to elsewhere in the Pokrovsk front line. And the fact is that, yeah, Russian progress in Pokrovsk has been steady, but this hopefully reflects a Ukrainian policy of steady withdrawal as they prepare other defensive positions. I'm always sort of perplexed at the Ukrainian commitment to hold Pokrovsk, including recently a GUR of military intelligence-led operation to hoist the Ukrainian flag over town buildings in the city center. I struggle to comprehend the Ukrainian strategy, but clearly the Russians are really hurting as well. If they have to commit all these forces, they're clearly taking huge casualties. And this is sort of the real, I think, story here. Remember, this is a war of attrition, and there's increasing signs that the Russian state of affairs is actually pretty terrible, right? Here is an example. Among Russian recruitment stations, particularly in eastern Russia, there have been widespread failures as recruiters have missed their conscription targets, sometimes by as much as 40%. Now, they're using the word conscription targets. That's not true. These are voluntary contract soldiers. And in one independent region, the Republic of Sakha, 7 heads of different recruitment offices were actually sent to the front in the 5th, 35th, and 29th Motor Rifle Regiment. And the average shortfall of recruitment in these regions is about 40% below what Moscow deems their targets. And once these recruiters have failed, they are, of course, shipped off to these high attrition units. And I think the fact is that these eastern regions are some of the regions where recruitment has been most popular among Russians. We've talked about the fact that it's no secret that Russians in places like St. Petersburg and Moscow, they are not signing these contracts because they are wealthy, they are cosmopolitan, and they have no interest in participating in the so-called special military operation when at any payday. But if you're in one of these poorer regions, the as we've talked about on this channel, the approximate equivalent is going to the poorest census tracts in the United States, places like rural Mississippi, rural Louisiana, knocking on doors and offering males $800,000, right? That's how much of a multiple on the prevailing wage Russia is out here offering. So even despite this massive payday, these folks in these regions are still now just refusing. And this is one of the problems of recruiting ethnic minorities, particularly minorities that live literally time zones and time zones away from the Kremlin. Is because the Kremlin, you may notice, you think of Russians, you're like, well, Russians speak, the Russian government in the Kremlin speaks Russian, is made up of European-looking Russians. In a lot of these regions, they speak local dialects, Yakut, for example. They look Asiatic or indigenous, and they have very little connection. And at some point, when you look and you go, damn, a third of the men in our village have been sent off and killed in this conflict, you start to go, you know, I think the Kremlin, I think Moscow can go fuck itself, right? It's hard not to resent these kind of things coming, again, from a distant capital that has allowed your region to become economically destitute. Yeah, 800 grand looks really good, but if you haven't gotten that 800 grand, instead what you've gotten is your village or town, your family decimated in this war, you're going to sit there and change your mentality. And I think that's what we're seeing. Now, the problem, again, with ethnic and linguistic minorities is that they don't have political power. They don't have even the ability to go viral on social media and reach native Russians or Russian-speaking Russians because, well, they don't speak the language. They don't look like us or whatever. It's it's a very human being problem. But Russia depends on these people. And because Russia is so ultra-nationalist, they have this other problem, right? For a while, they were recruiting foreign fighters, but the problem is the recruitment of these foreigners relied on the prospect of bringing them into Russia. But because Russia is, and Vladimir Putin's Russia particularly, is pretty ethno-nationalist, they really can't choose that path, right? Russians will become upset with that. So they're boxed in terms of their recruitment strategy. And that's why we're seeing these kind of desperate rob Peter to pay Paul kind of tactics. Now, I want to be clear that Russia still has a tremendous manpower advantage. They're still advancing in Pokrovsk. In one instance, even recently, Ukrainian forces actually had to pull back from positions near Zaporizhzhia because of Russian artillery fire, scaled up Russian artillery fire. Now, this is also interesting because it reflects a Ukrainian command with a way different mentality. Pulling back from some of these indefensible positions to better defended areas is actually a tactically reasonable decision. So then the question is, why are they willing to do it in places like Zaporizhzhia, right? It's right down here, but not willing to do it in Pokrovsk? It really is kind of puzzling. Again, and maybe a reflection of, at least in some commands, a reevaluation of the command culture. So anyway, guys, thanks to Sergey Zinchenko, Thomas Anderson, William Alexyenko, Georgiev, AL90. You can follow us on Spotify, where this podcast is. And of course, if you give us a listen, leave us a review. That really makes a difference. It helps improve the discovery algorithm. And you can always, of course, become a member. The button's down below. Thanks. Cheers.